Let me say something that will probably annoy a lot of wellness coaches, and I'm fine with that. The mental health advice most people dispense, take some me time, love yourself, set boundaries, practice gratitude, is not wrong exactly. It's just useless for people who actually need it. Think about that for a moment. The entire infrastructure of popular mental health guidance, the podcast, the Instagram infographics, the corporate wellness programs, it's designed for people who are already mentally stable, people who have enough bandwidth left over to reflect on themselves, make a plan and execute it consistently. People who can read a self-help book and think, yes, this applies to me, let me try this. That's not the person who is struggling. That's someone who is fine. And here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. If you are already past a certain threshold, if you have already crossed from stressed but functional into something heavier, the advice doesn't just fail to help, it makes you feel worse. Because you read it and it sounds right in some abstract way, but you can't grab onto it. You can't make it real. You try to love yourself and the instruction just bounces off. And then you feel broken on top of whatever you were already feeling. That's not a personal failure, that's a design flaw in the advice. And it gets even worse when the advice gets specific. Someone recently told me, with genuine good intentions, that I should think about what does me good and that I should be doing more of it. More of what feels good and things will improve. I want to be fair. I understand the impulse behind that. I do. But let me show you why it doesn't work in practice. If I do more of what feels good, I do less of what needs to be done. That's not a mindset problem. That's just time. And the things that don't get done don't disappear. They pile up. The to-do list grows, the obligations accumulate, and now, on top of whatever I was already carrying, I have a backlog, which creates more stress, not less. The advice assumes that time is elastic, that you can carve out a protected pocket of recovery without anything else giving way. You can't. Life doesn't pause while you recharge. The kids still need to be picked up. The clients still need answers. The invoices still need to go out. If you could freeze time, do what needs doing, rest properly, then return to your life without anything having shifted, sure, that advice would be fine. But that's not how time works. That's not how life works. What the advice actually does is add guilt to the pile. Because now you're not only stressed, you're also failing at self-care. You try to do more of what feels good, the to-do list got longer, and now you feel worse and irresponsible on top of it. The real answer isn't addition, it's support. If you can't find a way through on your own, and sometimes you genuinely can't, that's not weakness. You need people around you who help carry part of it. Not people who advise you to rest more, people who actually show up. That distinction matters, and we will come back to it. So let's talk about what actually happens when mental stress starts compounding. The mainstream assumption is that mental health works like a dial. You turn it up or down depending on circumstance. And at any point you can look at the dial and read where you are. Stressed, tired, burned out, whatever. The assumption is that self-awareness is always available to you. That your ability to observe yourself remains intact regardless of your mental state. It doesn't. This is the part nobody says clearly. Mental stress doesn't just affect how you feel. It changes how you think. It changes what you notice. It changes what you believe is normal. And it does this gradually, quietly, in a way that's almost impossible to catch from the inside. Here's a concrete version of this. When you are in a good place mentally, you can look at your week and say, I've been snapping at people more than usual. I should probably take a breath. That's self-awareness working correctly. You observe something, interpret it, course correct. But when you are past a certain point, that chain breaks. You might snap at someone and not even register it as unusual. Or you register it, but your brain constructs a convincing story about why it was justified. They were being difficult, the timing was bad, anyone would have reacted that way. The self-observation is still happening, but the interpretation is compromised. You're not seeing clearly anymore, and you don't know you're not seeing clearly. That's the trap. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just a slow incremental drift in your perception of what is normal. And here's the part that I think about a lot, because it applies directly to the kind of people most of you listening are. Entrepreneurs, consultants, team leads, people who run their own operations or who are responsible for others. People who have made a lifestyle, maybe even an identity, out of pushing through, out of being capable, out of handling things. Those people are especially bad at catching this drift, because they have trained themselves override signals. That's partly what got them where they are. You learned early on that discomfort is temporary, that you can function through resistance, that rest is something you schedule when work is done. That's a useful adaptation in a lot of context. It becomes a liability here. The mental health threshold isn't like a pulled muscle where you get a clear pain signal saying stop. It's more like slow erosion. The baseline shifts a little, you adjust. It shifts a little more, you adjust again. At each step you are comparing yourself to your recent self, not to where you actually should be. And your recent self was already off. So you never get the sharp signal, you just get a version of yourself that seems like the normal version, but isn't. I want to be straightforward with you here, because I think it matters for what follows. I'm not talking about this because I read it somewhere. I'm a single father of 2. That's been my reality for a while now. And I know, not theoretically, actually know what it looks like when things go downward. What it feels like to be running on the wrong mix and not see it clearly. What it's like to be the capable one, the one who handles things, the one who others depend on, while something is quietly eroding underneath all of that. I'm not going to turn this into a personal confession. That's not what this show is for, and frankly, it's not something I owe anyone. But I think you deserve to know that what I'm describing isn't abstract to me. I've been in the drift, and if I'm being honest, I'm probably still navigating in it some form right now. That's not a crisis declaration, it's just the reality of operating under sustained load without a co-pilot. The reason I say this is simple. Everything I'm about to tell you, I'm telling you because I lived the version where I didn't see it in time, not because I read a study. That gap between when it was visible to others and when it finally became visible to me, that gap is real, and it's a thing I almost never hear discussed honestly. There's actually a principle hiding in this, and I think it's one of the more unsettling truths about human self-awareness in general. By the time you consciously recognize something about yourself, it was already obvious to the people around you. Not just in mental health, this shows up everywhere. The founder who is losing their team's trust and is the last person in the room to sense it. The manager of those communication style has become corrosive over months, while their team has been quietly compensating around it. The person whose relationship has been deteriorating for years, while they were convinced everything was basically fine. We like to think of self-awareness as a first-person skill, something you do by journaling, meditating, reflecting. And those things have value, but they have a fundamental ceiling because the instrument you are using to examine yourself is the same instrument that might be compromised. You can't fully audit the eye with the eye. Other people don't have that problem. They are watching you from the outside. They see the pattern before you do because they are not inside the story you're telling yourself. So, what do you actually do with this? Two things, and neither of them is love yourself more. First, stop treating the absence of obvious symptoms as proof you are fine. The absence of a crisis is not the same as being okay. This sounds obvious, and it isn't. Most high-functioning people operate with a very high threshold for what counts as a signal worth paying attention to. Sleeping poorly for 3 weeks? Adapt. Getting increasingly cynical about things that used to interest you? Push through. Relationships feeling thin and effortful? You're just busy. Each of these individually might be nothing. Together in a trend, they are data. The question is not, am I having a breakdown? The question is, compared to who I was 12 months ago, is the direction of travel good or bad? That is a different question, and it's one you can actually answer with some accuracy. Trend matters more than state. Where you are heading matters more than where you are. Second, and this is the reframe I want you to take seriously. Build relationships where honest observation is part of the deal. Not therapy necessarily, though that has its place. I mean the specific practice of having people in your life who will tell you what they observe and whom you have given explicit permission to do so. A business partner, a close friend, a peer group that's real, not performative. The key word is explicit, because most people won't volunteer this information. They will notice that you've changed, that you seem off, that the edge in your voice is new, and they will stay quiet because they don't want to intrude or be wrong or make things awkward. You have to create the opening. You have to say at some earlier point than things are fine, if you ever see something I'm not seeing, I want to know. Tell me. That's not a vulnerable confession, that's operational intelligence. You are outsourcing part of your self-monitoring to a more reliable instrument. And here's the inverse of this. Become that person for others. The people around you, your team, your peers, your clients, your family. They are subject to the same blind spot. You may already be seeing something they don't. Most people stay quiet. Don't. You don't need to have a big emotional conversation. You just need to say something simple. Hey, you seem off lately. I don't need details, just checking in. That's it. You've opened a door. They will walk through if they need to. The uncomfortable summary of all of this is the common mental health narrative puts the responsibility for detection entirely on the individual. Notice your feelings, check in with yourself, be self-aware. And that works fine when you are fine. When you're not fine, the entire framework becomes unreliable at exactly the moment you need it most. We don't fix that by trying harder to notice ourselves. We fix it by building the kind of relationships and the kind of culture, whether that's in a team, a friendship group, or a professional community, where honest observation flows in both directions. Where it's not dramatic to say, I think something's off with you. Where it's not weakness to hear it. Mental health isn't a solo project. It never was. The advice that treats it as one is designed for people who don't need the advice. For everyone else, the ones actually under pressure, the ones who have built their identity around being capable and getting things done, the real skill isn't self-awareness. It's knowing when to trust someone else's eyes more than your own. That's it for this episode of Iconoclast Insights. If this landed somewhere, send it to someone who might need to hear it. And if you recognize yourself in any part of what I described, that's worth sitting with. Take care and see you next time.